This is your prompt. A necklace has 2 red beads for every 3 yellow beads. How many yellow beads are there if the necklace has 6 red beads? So take a minute with your tables, with a blank sheet of paper, talk about it, and let's start working it out.
Monica, there's so many great things about this lesson. What about it for you do you feel makes it a good Common Core lesson?
The thing about it that makes this a good Common Core lesson is the fact that I'm having the students to really work together. Prior to Common Core, I would really have them to work independently to see what they know on their own. And now I'm giving them an opportunity to try to figure it out together. And one thing that we talked about with Common Core is that you can't write what you can't speak. So I'm just giving them a chance to be with their peers, to talk it over, and to kind of struggle through it together.
I noticed also just the fact that you were able to take so much time on something that maybe prior you would have been much shorter lesson, allowing them so much time on this one concept.
Yes, that's true. This was one prompt, so the entire lesson for an hour was about this one prompt. And in the past, it's okay, here's a starter question, and now let's do a guided practice and then independent. So you're kind of rushing through, hoping that the kids grasped onto what they needed to just from the original opener. But this is like the whole lesson, this opener that does not finish even to the end of the lesson. So
it's a really good example of how mathematical practices, standards of mathematical practices, are an essential part of Common Core. One of them says that we ask students to make sense out of problems and to persevere, and that's what really happened in your class in solving them. It's cool that it lasted more than one period.
I did want them to just really understand it, and that is something that is different with Common Core, because sometimes, and I didn't introduce the term ratio until like the middle or towards the end of the lesson, because sometimes we get so caught up with the terminology. Well, we're doing fractions, we're doing decimals, and I wanted them to really understand what was going on. So without me introducing, the term, do you understand what you're supposed to do? So that was the main thing that I wanted, for them to really be able to understand what's going on, because I felt like if they could understand it, then as we continue throughout, they would be able to manipulate it in different scenarios.
These are the yellow ones, just so you know. So it's 6 of these, and for every 2 red beads, there has to be 3 yellow beads.
I had them doing the Post-it notes with each table so that they could illustrate their thinking and to be able to write it now. Sometimes they don't know how to write it out, and that's something that I'll have to continue to work on. How do you write it? They like to show it, they can say it, but they have difficulty writing exactly what they were thinking.
One thing that I think is interesting about this lesson is ratio is actually one of the priority focus areas in 6th grade. And researchers have found that it takes a significant amount of time for students to actually develop proportional reasoning. So I found it really interesting the way that you introduced this in trying to get students to enter the problem. Most of them seem to have entered it using pictorial representations without having had like any prior background work necessarily on using ratios to compare quantities. So I just am curious, have you collaborated with the 6th grade teacher at your school? Is there any way that you guys kind of plan lessons together? Is this also a lesson she would be using in her classroom as well?
And to answer your question, no, I did not collaborate with the 6th grade teacher. And that's something that we definitely have to do.
Andrea, I think it's such a great question, because I think one of the things with Common Core that is different is that in the past, teachers may have just taken a copy of the standards for their grade and studied them and done a great job teaching those standards. But now Common Core really, because of the coherence across the standards, You really need to know, if you're a 5th grade teacher, what the 3rd and 4th grade teachers are covering, what the 6th and 7th grade teachers are covering, and more conversations need to be occurring where teachers are working together and really seeing where their teaching needs to end, where they have to say, maybe in the past they continued on, they say, you know what, that's now for the next teacher, and I move on to something else.
So that leads me to think, where's your school in terms of adopting Common Core?
We're in the early stages. So far, we have, in our building, we have an instructional leadership team, and they go to different meetings and they're learning about the Common Core. And so the things that I learn about Common Core, I definitely bring that back to them. And we're all still trying to wrap our minds around what it looks like, how it's different, how we might need to just really throw away all of our old practices and thinking and try to revamp. So it's definitely in the early stages. We have some people who are, really on board with it, going to different professional development, and some teachers who are just learning about it. We've all heard about it, but really knowing how to do it and how to implement it, that's something different. So we're in the early stages as a school.
Do you have new Common Core textbooks, or are you using your old textbooks and tweaking them?
We're using our old textbooks. So for this particular lesson, ratio that was in our 5th grade lesson, in our 5th grade curriculum. And it's also, and I know a lot of teachers say, well, I still have things to cover for the test. For our state tests, we still have ratio for 5th grade.
And that's going to be one of the difficulties during, some people call it the transition years, where there are going to be some concepts that we're going to have to teach that aren't going to be necessarily in the grade they are, but ones that previously they missed just because we're transitioning into this. And I think as long as we're spending the majority of time on the major work of the grade, but it's going to be difficult for teachers to figure out exactly what their students are coming in and what they might be missing. Can you talk a little bit about the makeup of your students, what your class is like?
Yes, so I have 28 students, and they are about, as a class, the average, when I think about the standard test for our state, they were about in the 63rd percentile as a class. So they're not exceeding the standards as a class, but they're not way below either. So for every 3 of one color, they're going to be 2 of the other. And I heard that back table here, I kept hearing the fraction. How does this relate to fractions?
Because when you have fractions, like on our paper, it said 15 in all, and maybe like all those other yellow bees, like 3 of 15, and yeah, like those 3 yellow bees would be 3 of 15, or all of them together 9 of 15, or all the reds together 6 of 15.
With the shifts in the Common Core, we know that there's a shift in focus and coherence, which we've seen. And then the third shift is an increase in rigor in the major work of the grade, which asks for fluency and procedural skill, for deep conceptual understanding, and for application. We really see that deep conceptual skill here, and I think any one particular lesson, we're never going to see all 3. Can you talk about how you've increased procedural skill and fluency in your classroom?
What I've been able to do, and Common Core has said it's okay, to make sure that they have those fluency opportunities. So once a week, I'll give them just a time test for their timetables and, basic facts to help improve their fluency, which helps to make the application and the actual the coherence deeper and more. It just helps to make the connection for them if they have that fluency. If they don't have the fluency, it's harder for them to see it. So that's one way that I've been trying to increase that in my classroom.
Monica, I really liked that question that you asked. How does this relate to fractions? I think one of the misconceptions that we see a lot of students have in 6th grade when we introduce ratios is how they are alike and how they are different from fractions. And it was really amazing to me that even in 5th grade, this student was able to go from a part-part ratio to immediately the part whole and connect that back to fractions. So really, developing kind of that understanding early on.
And we've spent a lot of time with fractions. Most math teachers know that 5th grade is a staple for fractions, and that was one of the main things that I wanted them to be able to see, that coherence of how it relates to a bigger concept and be able to build on what they've already learned. So I'm happy they were able to understand it.
Monica, were you, one of the emphasis on Common Core, in addition to coherence, is focus. And in this video, you obviously focus the entire period and probably more on this concept. One of the benefits we're hoping is that with this focus on fewer topics, that this will free you up to devote time like this to go into other topics extensively. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah, I have, because just with this example, in the past, after we finished one unit, if I go back the next day sometimes, they'll be like, oh, wait a minute, what did we do? And then as a teacher, you're like, we went over this, so how come you don't remember this? But the fact that they are having an ability now to have the time to really dive into what is happening, understanding at an authentic level, it makes the difference, because now they're able to pull from that, knowledge bank to apply it to someplace else, which is what we ultimately want our students to be able to do.